From the daring depths to the highest awards, and from the freezing North Atlantic to the exotic East, we're on a swashbuckling submariner journey. That's right, today we're going to dive in, excuse the pun, into the life, campaigns, and most importantly, the medals of Das Boot Commander de Alte, known as the Old Man. Before we start, apologies for any mispronunciations. I'm not too pucker on the old German, but I'll give it my best shot. The movie Das Boot is based on the 1973 novel of the same name, written by Lothar Gunther Buchheim. The novel is a semi-autobiographical account of Buchheim's experiences aboard the German submarine U-96 during World War II. In the movie, the commander of the vessel is known to the crew as the Old Man, being around 30 years old, much older than most of the crew, who are mainly in their late teens or early 20s. The submarine is based in La Rochelle in France. When France surrendered to Germany in June 1940, she handed over her western ports. These ports would be used by the German Kriegsmarine and U-boat fleets to launch a series of campaigns in the North Atlantic, and from 1942, the eastern seaboard of America, intended to cut off Britain's lifeline of supplies, both from her empire and the United States. Here's some background on the real U-96. As part of the 7th U-boat flotilla stationed in Saint-Nazaire on the French Atlantic coast, U-96 conducted 11 patrols, sinking 20 ships in total, amounting to over 180,000 tons and damaging 4 other ships. She also caused one vessel of over 8,000 tons to be declared a total loss. The boat was a member of 11 wolf packs in her lifetime. On the 30th of March 1945, U-96 was sunk during a US bombing raid whilst in a submarine pen in Wilhelmshaven. Here's a remarkable fact. In her entire career, U-96 suffered no significant casualties to her crew. The submarine was also known for her emblem, a green laughing swordfish. On 27th of October 1941, U-96 left for her 7th war patrol with journalist Lothar Gunther Buchheim aboard. 3 days later, she would join a German wolf pack. These were coordinated groups of submarines that would attack convoys en masse. On the 31st of October, the group made contact with convoy OS-10. U-96 launched 4 torpedoes at long range, one of which struck the Dutch ship SS Bennekom. The ship went down half an hour after being hit, taking 9 of her crew of 56 with her. Following the attack, a Royal Navy escort ship, HMS Lulworth, arrived on the scene and forced U-96 underwater with gunfire. The U-boat escaped a further barrage of 27 depth charges unscathed. The next day, the boat encountered 2 more destroyer escorts charging down on them, but the daring submariners managed to escape again. The U-boat then spent the rest of November 1941 patrolling the North Atlantic, attached to 2 more wolf packs, until secretly entering the neutral port of Vigo in Spain, and being resupplied by an interned German merchant vessel on the 27th of November. After leaving Vigo with new supplies, U-96 made for the Strait of Gibraltar with orders to enter the Mediterranean. However, the submarine was spotted by a Royal Navy aircraft and damaged by 2 bombs. Unable to reach her destination, U-96 decided to return to base. On the 6th of December 1941, after having spent 41 days at sea, U-96 returned to port at Saint-Nazaire, having sunk just 1 ship. The movie is pretty much based on this storyline, with a few changes here and there. During the movie production, amazingly, Heinrich Lehmann Willenbrock, the captain of the real U-96 during Buchheim's 1941 patrol, served as a consultant for the movie. Like Willenbrock, de Alte, or the Old Man in the movie, was awarded the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. Medal number 1, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross. The Iron Cross was first created in the Napoleonic Wars, with its final iteration, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, being established in 1939 to replace the traditional higher awards that were issued by the old German Empire, such as the Pour le Mérite or Blue Max, that was awarded in the First World War to people such as the Red Baron. His medals would be an interesting video in itself. This decoration was awarded for outstanding military leadership or extreme bravery on the battlefield. This was bling that meant I mean business. All branches of the German armed forces during World War II were eligible for the award. As the war progressed, higher grades were issued. The Knight's Cross was eventually awarded in 5 grades. After the original Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross came number 2, the Knight's Cross with oak leaves. This was awarded for additional acts of bravery. This version with oak leaves was awarded to Willenbrock on the 31st of December 1941. The third version was the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords for further exceptional bravery. The fourth was the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds for extraordinary achievements. And finally, the Knight's Cross with golden oak leaves, swords and diamonds, the highest level, which was only awarded once, to Hans Ulrich Rudel. In the movie, it looks like the Alta has the first award. The U-boat service was different than the other services due to the fact that there was a clear regulation for the award being based on tonnage of enemy sunk rather than recommendations based on differing actions in other services. For U-boats, the threshold was reportedly 100,000 tons. Another U-boat commander, Thompson, who is described as one of the old guard submariners in the movie, also sports a Knight's Cross. This is shown in the scene where Thompson, in the finest tradition of the Navy, is found collapsed in the toilets of a bordello, having vomited over himself after consuming a large amount of alcohol, otherwise known to us British as being absolutely trolleyed. In all seriousness, it's assumed the character is somewhat shell-shocked from his experiences. U-96 and Thompson's boat do meet later in the Atlantic, very briefly. The medal itself, the cross, has a large icon of the German regime at the time in the middle of it, with the year 1939 on the bottom arm. The reverse is blank. The ribbon is the tricolour of the old German Empire, red, white and black. So this is where I bait and switch you. Rather than continuing to look at the Atlantic and the U-boat war there, which I think has been covered in so many documentaries and YouTube videos, I really wanted to focus on another area of the submarine war in World War II, involving the Germans, which until a few months ago I had very little knowledge of, and it's absolutely fascinating. I'd read about Japanese and German exchanges of technology and sporadic U-boat activity in the South Atlantic and around South Africa, but nothing on the scale of what I'd later learned occurred between 1943 and 45, with German U-boat layers being established in modern Malaysia, Singapore and Indonesia. This was a forgotten chapter of the U-boat war, with German submariners waging war as far as New Zealand and Australia and prowling off the shoreline of India and the Arabian Gulf. These Far Eastern forces, known as Hitler's Grey Wolves, fought Allied naval and air power, tropical storms, malaria and that implacable foe, the ocean. Although U-boat operations began officially in the Indian Ocean in October 1942, the boats were not permanently based there, relying on rendezvousing with supply submarines known as milk cows, and ultimately having to withdraw back to submarine bases in occupied France for refit and maintenance after a patrol. The vast distances and limited support infrastructure posed significant logistical challenges. U-boats had to travel long distances through the Atlantic Ocean, around the Cape of Good Hope and into the Indian Ocean, making supply and maintenance difficult. A more permanent solution was needed. In August 1943, U-178, the first German U-boat, arrived for permanent station in the Georgetown harbour of Penang Island, off Malaysia. The arrival of the vessel heralded nearly 2 years of operational U-boat presence in the Far East. This would be known as the Monsoon Gruppe, or Monsoon Group. In total, nearly 40 U-boats would be assigned to penetrate the Indian Ocean, as far north as the Arabian Sea, and then proceed on to Malaysia to take up station in the Far East. The decision to permanently station U-boats in the Far East was due to a change in strategy by German Naval Chief Karl Donitz. Earlier in the war, Donitz had thought deploying submarines for offensive operations in the Far East was a waste of time and resources, which otherwise could have been more effectively utilised in the North Atlantic to bring about more damage to the Allied war effort. Monsoon had 3 main objectives. Number 1, disrupt Allied shipping in the Indian Ocean. Number 2, continue the exchange of technology for raw materials with Japan and increase cooperation. And number 3, offset losses to U-boats in the North Atlantic by diverting Allied resources to the Indian Ocean. Donitz hoped this new campaign in the Indian Ocean and the Far East would divert enough Allied resources to be able to buy him time to regroup, rearm, and reassess the situation in the North Atlantic, and thereby in 1944 come out with a new strategy which would bring ultimate success. Donitz believed this would be a temporary retreat from the Atlantic. Throughout the lifetime of the operation, the primary U-boat types that were used were the Type 9Cs that were designed for long-distance offensive patrols that concentrated on the Arabian Gulf and Indian Ocean. Also, two Type 9D2s had an even longer range and were also used, as well as the Type 14 U-tankers, known as milk cows. Boats rendezvoused with U-boats at sea to provide fuel, torpedoes and other provisions. At one point as well, Italian submarines were also sent out east. That's an interesting story in itself and beyond the scope of this video. The German command structure within the Far East was a hodgepodge of stranded naval officers from surface raiders or other naval vessels. The flotilla was commanded from Penang. The facility, although not a dry dock, was able to accommodate up to 5 U-boats at a time. However, the leadership there faced multiple problems. Owing to a lack of skilled workers, U-boat crewmen were compelled to undertake the majority of maintenance themselves, adding to their workload between operational patrols. Whatever parts were required were shipped from Germany, or else samples were produced so that the Japanese could copy them and produce high-quality replicas, despite the fact that many Japanese replacement parts, not based on German specifications, lacked the quality finish of the European spares. Likewise, welding and general hull maintenance did not match the high standards set within German shipyards. Another issue was the lack of high-quality lubricating oils used by the U-boats. This vital material could not be sourced, and thus wear on U-boat machinery was much more severe than anticipated. The U-boat men were put up in former colonial residences and hotels. U-boat crews would also go up into the highlands or hill stations to relax and have recreational facilities up there. One crewman states, "With nearly unlimited freedom, they felt, the U-boaters, as if they were in paradise." U-boats were sent to Singapore, which was renamed Shonan by the Japanese for dry dock or more intensive repair. However, the Japanese prioritised their boats, so the Germans had to hang around waiting for repairs. Turnaround time for a U-boat would typically be around 50 days all in all, to be ready for its next war patrol. The other German bases as part of the flotilla were established in Jakarta and Surabaya in Indonesia. Georgetown in Penang also acted as a submarine base for the Japanese, who had captured it from the British. They had built multiple workshops servicing these submarines. Although both countries were nominally allies, there were tensions between the two groups. The Japanese maintained formal control over the main radio transmitting station, only letting the Germans transmit at certain times. Conflicts between the Japanese Army and Navy hierarchy were also a problem. In ports controlled by the Japanese Army, a Kriegsmarine officer would first have to liaise with his opposite Japanese Navy number, who in turn would be forced to appeal for assistance to the regional army commander. This would lead to various bureaucratic problems, which would then impact the German efficiency on getting their U-boats out to sea. Malaria also ran rampant. At one point, up to 25% of German personnel were affected. Dysentery also ran amok, excuse the pun. Not great on submarines where you only had 1 or 2 toilets between the crew. From the end of 1943 and the first half of 1944, U-boat operations mainly focused on the Indian Ocean, with U-boats prowling the Arabian Sea, Bay of Bengal and the east coast of Africa. However, towards the end of 1944 that changed. An increased Allied anti-submarine warfare presence in the Indian Ocean made the prospect of campaigning against Australia and the Pacific Ocean more appealing to the German High Command. Off the coast of New Zealand and Australia, there was a possibility of a new and potentially abundant hunting ground for U-boats. In October and November 1944, 4 U-boats were sent to prowl the waters of Australia and New Zealand. Unbeknownst to them, Allied knowledge of Japanese cipher and a breaking of the Enigma code earlier in the war would lead to these U-boats being intercepted. By deciphering radio signals, the Allies were aware that German submarines would be intending to target the shipping lanes of southwest Australia and acted accordingly. Ultimately, this would lead to 3 of these 4 U-boats being intercepted and sunk. U-168, sailing from Jakarta, was torpedoed and sunk by a Dutch submarine. No less than 3 US submarines were dispatched from Darwin, Australia, to intercept the U-537. Near Bali, the U-boat was caught on the surface, and USS Flounder sank the boat with a spread of torpedoes. there were no survivors. A third U-boat, U-196, disappeared, her fate unknown. Only one U-boat, U-862, was successful, and it had a wild journey. Staying clear of Allied anti-submarine patrols, the skipper was extremely cautious. Incredibly, the U-boat arrived off Kangaroo Island in South Australia on the 6th of December. Frustrated by a lack of targets, the boat eventually sighted a Greek merchant ship, but the attack was unsuccessful. The skipper then decided to target shipping lanes between Melbourne and New Zealand. Several further failed attacks were made. These were attributed to unreliable torpedoes. Finally, a successful attack occurred on the American Liberty ship SS Robert J. Walker on Christmas Eve 1944. This was the only ship sunk by a U-boat in the Pacific Ocean. The U-boat then continued its journey, rounding New Zealand's North Cape by Cape Regina, and then covertly entered Gisborne Harbour, watching cars and people walking the streets with no sign of blackouts. With more failed opportunities, the U-boat then went down to Hawke's Bay and Napier, before being recalled back to Indonesia. On their way home, they sank another ship off the western coast of Australia, SS Peter Sylvester, on the 6th of February 1945. This was an incredible journey of survival and endurance. As the war progressed, the Allies intensified their naval and air patrols in the Indian Ocean, making it more dangerous for U-boats to operate. Many U-boats were sunk or damaged by Allied forces, and some were scuttled by their own crews to avoid capture. The Monsoon Group faced significant challenges, including long supply lines, limited support infrastructure, and the vast expanse of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Despite these obstacles, the U-boats managed to achieve some successes before the operation was eventually scaled down as the war progressed and ended. When Germany surrendered, the Japanese interned the German crews and compelled them to hand over their boats to the Japanese Imperial Navy. They were then required to train the Japanese sailors on the systems and how to crew these boats. When Japan surrendered roughly 3 months later, the majority of these U-boats were yet to be operational. In summary, the effectiveness of the U-Boat Monsoon operation, or Monsun Gruppe as it was known to the Germans, in the Far East was mixed. Initially, the operation saw some success, with U-boats managing to disrupt Allied shipping and sink and damage approximately 100 or so Allied vessels before the tide of war changed. However, as the war progressed, the operation faced increasing challenges. These included Allied countermeasures improving, long and increasingly tenuous supply lines, increasing Allied naval and air superiority and presence in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, and damage and losses that were essentially unsustainable for the Germans in the Far East. Overall, according to historian Jürgen Rohwer, 133 ships in total were sunk by German U-boats in the Indian Ocean. Award number 2, the U-Boat War Badge. The U-Boat War Badge was originally instituted during the First World War on the 1st of February 1918. It was awarded to recognise U-boat crews who had completed 3 war patrols. The badge was worn on the lower left side of the uniform and was oval-shaped, resembling a wreath of laurel leaves. A submarine lay across the centre, and the German state crown was inlaid at the centre top of the wreath. In October 1939, the U-Boat War Badge was reinstituted. It was very similar to the original badge, with the exception of the German state crown being replaced with the new regime's emblem. A more modernised submarine, now facing towards the left, was also used. The new version was first made of bronze metal, with the later ones made of zinc with a gold wash. Seen as an elite force, U-boat crewmen received bonuses known as diving pay and confined space allowance. There were several ways to be awarded this medal in World War II. The most common would be the completion of 2 or more war patrols. Although the completion of 2 war patrols might seem a lowly requirement, a typical U-boat war cruise would often run into months at a time, and were incredibly dangerous. The other occasion when this badge was awarded was having been wounded during a patrol or killed in action. Interestingly, a U-boat war badge with diamonds was also later created. This badge was a special issue award given to U-boat commanders who had received the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross with oak leaf. Around 30 were issued. For researching this topic on U-boats from the Far East, I used the book Hitler's Grey Wolves by Lawrence Patterson. I bought the book a couple of years ago and only recently got round to reading it and was glad I did. There are lots of granular level details which I like, so definitely worth a read if you're into U-boat history. Interestingly, the author is also a drummer in the heavy metal band Raven Lord. Musically not my cup of tea, but don't knock it till you've tried it. In summary, for the Alte, or the Old Man, we have a Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, and also a submarine war badge. It's also highly likely before his Knight's Cross that he was awarded a more junior Iron Cross award. However, we can't see that from his uniform. Thanks for watching. I hope you found some value from this, and I'll see you in the next one.